Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I wanted to talk to you about 5 of my very best reads from 2021. The first book on my list is Home by Karen Dion. This actually isn't a new book, it was published for the first time in 2017, but I stumbled across it by accident in a garden centre actually. I went shopping with my mum and it was on one of those tables where you get 2 books for £5 and I just thought the premise sounded interesting and I would pick it up. It was also originally published as The Marsh King's Daughter, so you may have heard of it under that name. So in this book we follow Helena, who is kind of living pretty much off the grid. She takes great pains to protect her privacy. She's running her own business selling jam, but she doesn't really get involved in the local community a great deal. She lives with her husband and a daughter, and we see that she's a really very private person. However, we gradually find out that that's because she was the victim of a really awful crime as a child. She grew up in this really remote cabin in Michigan by the lake, by the marsh actually. Her dad was like a survival expert and she grew up being taught hunting and fishing and survival skills, and she just assumed that everybody lived like that. But what she actually learned was that she was the product of her mother having been kidnapped as a teenager herself, being held hostage by Helena's father, and he got her pregnant and she was a child born in captivity. So she found out that her dad, who she really respected and who taught her everything and knew, was actually this monster who'd taken a teenage girl and held her prisoner all these years. Helena and her mum get out of that situation and she is now living this kind of off-the-grid life, but peacefully. Until one day she hears on the radio that her father has escaped the maximum security prison, and then she knows that the next thing is he's going to be coming for her. So we get this thriller that she puts all her survival skills that she's learnt from her father to use in tracking him down before he gets to her. I just thought this was a really excellent thriller. It was really exciting, really fast paced, a really great sense of atmosphere from the marsh and the teaching of the survival skills that her dad imparts upon her. There were like a few kind of uncomfortable scenes where she had to go hunting, but it was all just so atmospheric, and it's one that I still think about today. The plot is kind of similar to Emma Donohue's Room in the sense that you've got a kidnapped woman and a child born in captivity and the escaping, but this book is actually very different in terms of you get much more about the relationship between Helena and her father and what kind of person that's made her. Yeah, it's just a really great book and one that I definitely recommend. In fact, now would actually be the perfect time to read this book because it's being turned into a feature film set for release sometime in 2022, starring Daisy Ridley and Ben Mendelsohn, who actually will be reunited for, as far as I know, the first time since Rogue One, so that'll be interesting. Daisy Ridley isn't quite who I pictured for the lead role when I was reading the book, but I really like her as an actress, so I'll be interested to see how she inhabits that role. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the release of that and would recommend that you pick up Home if you haven't already. The next book on my list is a romance, which I do occasionally read, although not as much. Just lately I tend to prefer thrillers and horror. But this is one that I'd heard almost universally raved about, so I thought I would give it a try. It's The On Honeymooners by Christina Lauren, and it tells the story of Olive and Ethan. Olive is an identical twin and her sister Amy is getting married. Amy's the one who's always like the perfect one, always got her life under control, whereas Olive's a bit more kind of scatty and doesn't always know what she's wanting to do in life. Amy is marrying this guy called Dean, who's got a brother called Ethan. And Olive and Ethan, because of a misunderstanding when they first met, they just can't stand the sight of each other, but they figure that they'll put the differences aside for the wedding because they're best man and maid of honour respectively, so they'll have to grin and bear it for the ceremony and then go back to hating each other again. But in true rom-com style, something goes horribly wrong at the wedding and the entire bridal party is poisoned by the shellfish from the buffet, apart from Olive and Ethan, who didn't eat it. So next there's a honeymoon going begging because Amy's too poorly to go, so she tells Olive that she might as well go on it, and unfortunately the person that she's going to have to go on the honeymoon with and pretend to be married to is Ethan. So like hilarity ensues, and it's a really good kind of friends to lovers and love to hate rom-com. There's some really funny scenes in this and I just really enjoyed it. It's a real feel-good novel, ideal for taking on holiday or just reading any time of year. As an aside, I cast a young Josh Hartnett as Ethan in the book in my imagination, but that's just me, so you'll probably think of somebody else to play him because we're no longer in the year 2000. The next book on my list is Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier, which I've got here. This book I found based on the YouTube community's reviews. It's another one that was getting a lot of publicity, so I thought I would check it out last year. And this book was just so good. It's so dark, so like racy, really exciting. It's got the dual timelines that I really enjoy. Some set in when she was a teenager, some set now. In Jar of Hearts we follow a main character called, I think you say Geo, it's short for Georgina but they spell it G-E-O, so I'm going Geo? Anyway, whatever she's called, we follow her, and her best friend went missing when they were all 16. She went to a party and never came home. Then, all of a sudden, in the present day, Angela's remains are discovered in the woods right near where Geo lives, and she's discovered to be the victim of this famous serial killer from the area, who, by the way, Geo was actually romantically involved with when they were teenagers. She was kind of obsessed with him. So she gets arrested for being party to Angela's murder. She's also arrested by her former friend, Kaiser, who is now working as a cop in the area. And he's got to piece together the truth about what really happened at the same time as having to arrest one of his former best friends and work out what happened, because Calvin, the serial killer, is now on the run, and also he's now apparently abducting more people because more bodies have turned up. I thought this book was really clever, it had some great twists, and you get a real sense of the tone that the book's going to take right from the beginning in the prison scenes where Jo gets taken to this awful women's prison and it's just horrible, and you think, oh, okay, that's where we're going with this. And it just keeps that tone throughout, and it's just really, really excellent. So undoubtedly one of my favourites of last year. The next book on my list is Hairpin Bridge by Taylor Adams. Now, this book is probably somewhat of an unpopular choice as my favourite of, well, one of my favourites of last year, because it was not particularly well received by the book reviews that I've read and the booktube community as a whole, most of whom actually had already read his other book, No Exit, and they said this one was nowhere near as good as No Exit, and it just was unbelievable and not very plausible, basically. However, I've not read No Exit yet. It's on my list on my Kindle to read very soon, and perhaps that's why I really enjoyed this book, and I just thought it was a really great thriller. So in this book we follow Lena, whose twin sister Cambry has apparently committed suicide by jumping off this bridge called Hairpin Bridge. Trouble is, Lena doesn't really believe that Cambry would have done that. She thinks there's something amiss, that her twin sister wouldn't have jumped off the bridge, and so she sets off to Hairpin Bridge to meet up with the cop who supposedly found her body and to try and prise the truth of what happened out of him. This is quite a claustrophobic thriller because much of it, in fact nearly all of it, apart from a few scenes in a diner, is set on Hairpin Bridge, but you really do get this suspenseful tone throughout of wondering what's going to happen to Lena, wondering if this cop is really who he says he is, and wondering what happened to Cambry. Did she commit suicide? What happened? Was she murdered? And partway through it takes a really delicious twist. I really enjoy, for some reason, books set around highways and on the road and people being taken from roads and disappearing, so this was right up my street and I thought it was really exciting. I also really, really liked the car chase scenes. Most people don't tend to enjoy those apparently in this book, but I just thought they were really well done, really exciting. My heart was in my mouth and I just couldn't stop turning the pages, and so for that reason it's one of my most memorable books of 2021. And finally, we have Survive the Night by Riley Sager. In my previous video I've spoken about how much I love Riley Sager's work, and this book was no exception. Again though, it's another one that was not particularly universally well reviewed. So in this book we follow Charlie, who's a movie-obsessed college student, and her friend was recently murdered and she feels guilty because she wasn't with her on this night out from which she was abducted, and she just decides that her mental health is really taking a turn for the worse and she wants to go home. She wants to go home to her grandmother's house before Thanksgiving. So she goes to this ride board. It's set in 1991 when people used to like hitchhike across the country rather than getting Ubers, I don't know, or like driving themselves. And there she meets Josh, who is advertising a ride because he's going that way, he's going her way, and so she agrees to take a ride with him. However, once Charlie is in the car and confined in this small space with Josh, she begins to wonder if he is who he says he is, or if he is in fact the campus killer who murdered her best friend. There's been a lot said in this book about the main character, Charlie, that she made stupid decisions, that she just had numerous opportunities to get out of this car and to not be in the situation that she's in, but I thought that Riley Sager actually really handled that quite well. And in terms of the hitchhiking, I know this was something that a lot of people did still in the 1990s. I recently watched a documentary about the co-ed killer, and it was just so surprising to look at all the footage of women hitchhiking and just willingly getting into cars with strangers, so it wasn't outside the realms of possibility for me that she would have done that. I also still feel that Riley Sager's writing just really gels with me. He has that really nostalgic kind of way of writing, he builds a creepy atmosphere, he does it so well you can't stop reading, you don't want to put the book down, and so I just really enjoyed it. The only other reviewer that I've actually seen on my Instagram who enjoyed it as well is Abby at Crime by the Book. She gave it 5 out of 5 and so did I. I just thought it was fantastic, and I'll definitely be picking up more books from him in the future and going back to the ones that I haven't yet visited from his back catalogue because I've not even read them all yet. But I feel Survive the Night deserves its place on my list of top 5 books for 2021. Okay, that's it for this list and for this video. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd like to know if you rated these books as highly as I did, and if you've gained any inspiration for your TBR from this list if you haven't read the books already. In the meantime, until the next video, happy reading, bye!